Welcome to In Depth. In this very hot summer, the heat remains high on Capitol Hill. Lawmakers have a bevy of issues they are facing, and I'm joined tonight by Indiana 8th District Congressman Larry Bucshon. Congressman, thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, thanks for having me, Brad. Appreciate it.
You're playing a major role. Let's talk about this first issue first, and that would be the opioid crisis in America. You're pushing legislation aimed at what some view as an addiction problem involving our seniors, elderly people. Tell me exactly what this legislation would do.
Yeah, well, first of all, the opioid crisis is hitting everyone across socioeconomic groups, across age groups. It's really been building probably for about the last 20 years, but now we've reached really a pinnacle here, and we're getting contaminated heroin coming in with fentanyl, and people are dying from it. So what we're trying to do, especially for seniors, because seniors are included in that group that are being primarily affected by prescription drugs, is making sure that when you sign up for Medicare initially, the physician on your entry physical examination asks you about chronic pain and if you're using opioids. The other thing we're trying to do is make non-opioid alternatives more, I would say, easy to prescribe, because in hospitals, opioids cost almost nothing, but a lot of the non-opioid alternatives are very expensive. So we're doing a couple of things with Medicare to try to evaluate seniors initially and give them advice, and then also make non-opioid alternatives available. And
that takes me to some of the pushback on this, because an elderly person who has been legally prescribed either Percocet or Loratab or Tramadol, opioids, if that would be potentially taken away, a non-opioid painkiller. You're a doctor.
Right.
Are those really as effective as opioids?
Well, some are and some aren't. It depends on the patient. For example, my father. My father is 83 and he has chronic back problems. There's really nothing surgically that can be done. And non-opioid alternatives like Advil, he actually can't take because he's had some kidney issues. Mm-hmm. So he does depend on an opioid a couple of times a day just to be able to get out of the chair. So what we want to do is make sure that people have good advice, but we also want to make sure that people have the availability of medicines prescribed by their physician for legitimate chronic pain issues. And I think that is a big issue, and we're paying attention. And
in this day and age of, well, some would say a lack of bipartisanship, what is the chance that this can survive Capitol Hill?
Well, I think it's going to. It's the legislation is actually a big package that has already passed through the House, and the Senate is doing the same thing. And so I think that it's going to get to the president's desk. This has been a bipartisan effort. Opioid addiction is not a partisan issue. And we're doing all kinds of things. There's other things we needed to do to give the government more authority, for example, to prevent these things from being mailed to the United States from China primarily. So it's really comprehensive. I'd encourage your viewers to go to my official website, and they'll be able to get more information about what Congress is doing on their behalf in this issue.
You tell me tonight you're going to be heading to the border, and we are in the middle of a huge debate in this country on the separation of immigrant children from their parents. And I know you've made a statement online that you do not tolerate the separation of immigrant
No, I don't
families.
think it's the right approach. And let me just give a little bit of background on why it happened. During the Obama administration, when families came to the border, it would be like getting a traffic ticket and then getting a court date. And that's what they did for these families, and then with sponsors or family members, released them into the United States. The Trump administration changed that policy, and instead of just giving you a ticket and giving you a court date, they actually physically arrested people for crossing the border illegally. And I think what they didn't understand initially was, by law, they were going to have to separate children from their parents. And when President Trump realized this was an issue, he did an executive order to reverse it. So that was appropriate that they did that.
And the order has been reversed, but
that's correct.
There's estimates that perhaps 2,000 children are still separated from their families, and this is throughout the country.
Yeah, we think that's the case, and the administration's actively getting these kids back to their parents. But it's a more complicated problem because we have actually about 12,000 children in our custody, because 10,000 are here unaccompanied. They came across the border without adults, and that's what I'm going to find out when I go down to the border. Health and Human Services has these shelters, and as a physician, I'm going to visit and see how they're being taken care of. But it's a bigger issue with children other than just the family separation. We have about 10,000 unaccompanied minors who are in the care of the United States government at this point. We're trying to get them back to their home countries, to their families, but it's a complicated issue.
And talking about borders, not only the one to the south, but also to the north and beyond.
That's correct.
I mean, across the pond, so to speak. Tariffs.
Yeah.
Are we heading into a trade war that may damage jobs right here in Indiana?
Well, I hope not, because I'm not a big tariff person. I don't think that's the right approach. I'm more for fair trade and getting deals with countries. But, you know, the president's strategy is different. And I think both Republicans and Democrats have voiced our concerns to the administration that we do not want a trade war, particularly for our agricultural industry, right? In Indiana, the soybeans that we grow here are exported to China. 2/3 of China's export market for soybeans comes from the United States. So I think it's more of a negotiating tactic. I do think that in my interactions with Secretary Ross, and I have done that because I'm co-chair of the Aluminum Caucus in the House, I think that they're hopeful that we will come to an agreement with both the EU, Canada, Mexico, and China, and that these tariffs will not be permanent and will not hurt our workers.
Okay, and let's talk about the U.S. Senate now. This does not necessarily involve the House, but it affects the country. The President says next Monday he's going to announce his pick, his nominee, for the next Supreme Court justice. How do you feel about a conservative justice, which most people believe it will be, at least from the finalists, and the impact that may have?
Well, I don't know any of the people that are on the list, but I can tell you that from what I'm reading and what I hear from the administration, they have some very strong candidates for the position. And I do think that President Trump is going to appoint a conservative judge to the court, and I do think they'll be confirmed. So I'm in a wait-and-see process. The House doesn't have a role in the confirmation process, but I do think, you know, Justice Kennedy wanted to retire under a Republican president with a Republican Senate for a reason, because he wanted a conservative judge appointed to the court.
Roe versus Wade, that has been the one ruling that has been on the books now for going on, it'll be 50 years.
Since 1973.
Okay. There is talk that that could be reversed by basically a new court, the makeup of a new court. Where do you stand on that issue, the ruling itself, Roe v. Wade, and do you think that is going to change?
Right. Well, first of all, I'm pro-life, and I have been. I think your viewers and my constituents know that I don't believe that abortion is the right approach. I'm a pro-life person. I have been for decades. Roe v. Wade, I think, was wrongly decided based on states' rights. I think initially the Supreme Court should have stayed out of it and allowed the states to make that judgment. That said, I think the president will not be asking any new judge the specific question of how they would rule on that case, because that case won't be before them. There may be other cases related to abortion that come before them, and I think that, you know, pro-life judges will make those decisions more in a pro-life way than maybe some have in the past. So I do think that this judge will take a conservative approach, like some of the others on the court, and we'll just have to see where things go.
All right. 8th District Congressman Larry Bucshon, thank you so much for joining us tonight. There will be much more to talk about as the year progresses and as the midterms approach. And as always, we will give both sides an equal voice in this as election day.
As you should. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you,
Appreciate it, Brad.
Congressman Larry Bucshon.